Hello and welcome to this new video. This is a video and this is going to continue kind of on the topic of the Shamanic Archetype, kind of. In this video today we're going to talk about the concept of the sacred space through an animistic lens. So this video should be then also seen as a complementary video to my previous video about the Shamanic Archetype. And I'll link that one in the description. So regarding shamans and sacred space. So shamans always begin healing ceremonies by opening a sacred space. Since everything in animism is sacred, it seems a bit ridiculous to call this space sacred. Well, that space isn't. It's all sacred. So the thing is that different objects are seen as sacred, yes, and the space in general is treated as sacred. It does not mean that there is no set apart space for performing specific rituals. Now, when a shaman creates a sacred space, what they're doing is mentally separating a portion of the apparent world from space where they will continue. From space where they will connect with the spiritual. So they purposefully create a division between what we're just going to be treated as regular space and the space in which the ritual is going to take place. You know, and they do this for a particular purpose, that space, which is also what sets it apart from the regular view of things being sacred. You know, perhaps they want to have a ritual there, meditate, or just use it as a ground, as a place of refuge for like a group of people, animals, or even nature. What is important about such a space is that we leave the affairs of ordinary life behind. So the bustling world of meetings and schedules that we have in our modern world, we would then leave that behind. We would not take that into that space, and in that space it doesn't exist. You know, and in that space, we're then prepared to meet the divine. And a good example for this, for instance, is the things one would undergo during the Dionysian rituals. You know, there one would leave the ordinary world behind and revel in the Dionysian energies within the sacred space dedicated to Dionysus. An important aspect of a sacred space then also is that a sacred space always has a leader. Think of a shaman, a druid, or a priest. The function of that leader figure is to guide others towards the divine, to act as a guide. And they also perform the rituals in which the others participate in. Like, you know, they guide those along and ensure that they're performed properly. What this really does is entering the liminal space. Because between the space in which you know, that which is sacred and the in the other space, which is just the profane space, there is a border between those two, and there's a certain ritual to that. And in the context of rites, liminality is being artificially produced. You know, the shaman or the priest does that by certain actions they take, certain rituals. A sacred space then also allows us to enter our quiet inner world where, for instance, healing takes place, or where one can contemplate on something. And within a sacred space, our burdens become lighter, and we can be touched by the hand of spirit, or by some form of deity. Jungian-based analytical psychology is also deeply rooted in the ideas of liminality, of the liminal space. The idea of a container or vessel as a key player in the ritual process of psychotherapy has been noted by many. The anima needs to be contained in a vessel to be able to operate with her, to work with her. That vessel can look like all kinds of different things in that context. And Carl Jung's objective was to provide a space he called a temenos, a magic circle, a vessel in which a transformation inherent in the patient's condition would be allowed to take place. And in creating that space is key into that transformation being able to take place. Jungians then also often tend to see the individuation process of self-realization as taking place within such a liminal space. So how does it take place in such a liminal space? Well, individuation begins with a withdrawal from normal modes of socialization, creating a space of liminality where those things of the persona and the social aspects being left behind. Similarly, within a sacred space, there's this idea of withdrawal of any form of status and hierarchy. It's also with Dionysus what happened. These things need to be left behind when crossing the border between the sacred and the profane, because because these things can form a certain barrier when working within the sacred space. Within the process of Jungian individuation, for instance, what is important to note here is that there is a need to accord space, time, and place for that liminal feeling. And it's dangerous if we either don't provide ritual space at all in our lives, or we stay in it too long. There's like a certain balance needed between the profane and the sacred space, that you can also incorporate it, because the sacred space is something you enter into to do the ritual, that what you're doing there, but you also have to come back and incorporate those things within the waking life. If you would be speaking about something happening in dreams, and you bring that to the waking life, you incorporate it. Similarly to a sacred space which you enter, you take those things that you learn in it to the realm of the normal things. Individuation then also can be seen as a movement through that liminal space and time, from the initial disorientation to at the end the integration. And what then also takes place in the dark phase of liminality is a process of breaking down in the interest of making something whole. There's also that's why those things happen. Was why things such as status and hierarchy, but also things regarding the persona and all those things are left behind. Because it is important that all these things need to be broken down in that space, so that it can be looked at the individual pieces, so that can be Like it can shape itself anew. The shaman, and that's also why I bring the shaman into it, is the archetypal figure of this liminal state itself. And it's also a symbol of the permanent accessibility towards such a state. Because the shaman can like shift back between the different realms. When talking about liminal space, they're also often protected by what is called a liminal deity. And it is a god or a goddess in mythology who presides over these thresholds. You know, that often seen as gates or doorways. Those thresholds. You know, and these liminal deities are the crossers of those boundaries. You know, think of the Greek Hermes or the Roman Janus. And then you also have special types of those liminal deities, such as dying and rising deities, such as, for instance, Dionysus. But you also have various agricultural deities, such as Ceres or Demeter, and those who descend into the underworld. And about descending into the underworld, it's crossing the threshold between life and death. And that represents the most fundamental of all boundaries. And specifically, vegetation deities in particular that mimic this annual dying and returning of plant life and stand as, are like really a symbol of this. And the girl in this spring movie that I'm here using as an example was standing here on the mountain. She is such a liminal deity of sorts, which is descending into the darkness. So basically descending into the underworld, and she's crossing the threshold between life and death. And and this girl in the spring movie is then also the anthropomorphic depiction of spring. And it is spring encountering winter, so life encountering death. So when it comes to opening a sacred space, so a shaman, druid, or priest first opens a sacred space before they do the actual ritual that they want to be doing. Before the ceremony, for the healing session, in the case of a shaman, for instance. Thing is about a sacred space is technically it can be open anywhere on Earth, indoors or outdoors. And while that is true, normally there are certain spaces set apart for this specific purpose. Next to using any space to create a sacred space, shamans or druids, for instance, use sacred groves. And often at such sites an altar or some other focal point was then placed. Like for druids, for instance, but also shamans, it would be a specific type of tree, like an oak tree, that would be at the center of said place. And this oak tree, this large tree, for instance, served as a symbol of the world tree. Which is pretty much a symbol of the self, how like the Unions would say. And it is exactly this altar which is the focal point of our intentions, to make what we are holding internally symbolically honored externally. And it takes the beauty, the hope, the dreams that live within us and gives them a place to live, where they can be tended to in the physical realm. When it comes to the movie Spring here, the men here that she interacts with is such a focal point, such an altar in which she in this case she bangs with her staff as a way of inviting the energies or deities into the space. In a mystic lens, what is happening here is that she's inviting in all the energies that she wants to honor and ask them for protection or guidance. No, you can invite all kinds of things, like think of Mother Earth, for instance, or the Great Spirit. You would have in some cultures power animals, ancestors, gods and goddesses. You know, and in the sense of the movie Spring, the girl then does this opening ritual. What she then does to open the sacred space, so she can invite the energy she's going to work with. What is not depicted here in the movie is the important part of is an important part of creating sacred space. You could say that the clouds which you passed earlier from the mountains could have such a function, or just the winter space itself. But I mean would be more symbolic then. But what normally happens is the cleansing of the space, which is going to be the sacred space. Now, plants are one of the most used things for purifying and consecrating places, over the entire world. They use those for cleansing the sacred space. For instance, the use of burning sacred smoke involves the slow burning of dried plant material or the melting of, for instance, pine resin, or the evaporating of water on hot coals. Now, in many cultures, the smoke released serves the dual purpose of clearing the air and the environment of denser energies, and also lifting us up towards the divine. That's the symbolic purpose of doing this. Plants that are pretty much quite often used for this purpose include, for instance, white sage, myrrh, lavender, juniper, and pine resin. And pretty much, the sole purpose of that within the ritual is of opening the space is to clear it and make it energy neutral. And this entire ritual has the secondary purpose of invoking the liminal space, you know, so that it's not yet sacred, but it's also not profane. And when it comes to inviting in energies or deities, so there are many ways to invite in the energies. It really depends on the culture. You know, like with some it's done in silence, while other, like shamans, use a drum, or some use some form of instrument or a sound, or a hymn, for instance. It's also often, like in the case of shamans, for instance, includes a special prayer. For instance, something dedicated to each direction, or dedicated towards a specific deity. A good example of this is with the ancient Romans, because in their temples they first would invoke Janus, that deity. Which is a liminal deity. It's the god of endings and beginnings. And so before they would start burning incense or perform their specific ritual and invoke any other deity at all yet, they would invoke this Janus deity to open the space, to connect that space with the divine. And in the case of the girl, she invoked this winter spirit with the ritual that she did before. Scene that we just saw, we can see that the girl surrenders to the spirit and shows the spirit proper respect. And this respect of the spirit is very important in such a ritual, because if we cannot bring ourselves to lose or surrender or accept defeat while working with such spirit or energy, which is really in the case of any of such rituals about transformation, if we cannot bring ourselves to do this, then we cannot continue the work with said deity or those energies. And that surrender requires tremendous courage, which you could also see from said scene when she was first sighing, before she then surrendered. And a big mistake, though, what can be made with regards to this by people is, instead of surrendering to the energies, to try to clamp down on them and try to control them and force them to point their energy towards the goal of the person. This is, in a sense, what many who are said to perform magic to further their own goals are doing. Right? This can easily lead to the person's ego to become inflated by thinking they can control the entity and the energy that it holds. But what they're forgetting is that long term this will shift the entity to the negative pole, the energy that they're working with. And then it can take vengeance on the person that forcefully tried to make it to do things against its will. Because it's an important aspect of it, that the energy that it works that you work with is not just a mere tool to be used. It's conscious in some form too. You can bring in here the Jungian concept of the anima. She's conscious to a certain degree too. In this scene, that she's interacting with this entity that she's working with, this spirit, this winter spirit. She's doing this in a way that is mutual. The entity did half of the song, and she completed the other half, signifying them working together. And the energies that one works with should then also be seen as something similar as to being in a relationship with another being. And this form of relationship being one without dependence, also without one forcing something on the other. So the relationship of equal others. Now coming to different energies. Like in a place such as a sacred grove, but also within temples of old, the elements were often invoked as well. The elements being a certain type of energies. This was symbolically done in different ways depending on the element. It is also an important thing when working with certain energies. It all depends on what you are working with, how you approach it. Fire, for instance, is said to be. Fire, for instance, is said. It is said, for instance, that fire can be honored and invoked by lighting a candle, a bonfire, smudging, or lighting incense, for instance. Water can be honored and invoked through misting, taking a sacred bath, visiting a wild body of water, or going through some cleansing ritual. Whilst earth can be honored and invoked through walking barefoot outdoors, gathering plants for the use in the ceremony. Rocks or crystals worked too as a symbol for earth. And finally, air can be honored and invoked through doing something like breathing exercises, smudging with plants and witnessing the plumes of smoke that fill the air. Singing is or chanting is also one of such things that is often done. Or symbols that represent the sky are often also used. And it's also, you know, it's important to properly know what elements and energies and entities one is working with, so one can work together with it in a good way. So you can also properly relate to it and know how to be respectful of it. When it comes to the ritual itself, and then after that closing the sacred space, well, now after this scene, there's only one thing left, and it has to do with the ritual itself and then closing the sacred space. So once a specific ritual one wanted to perform has been performed, so you can see in the scene also within this movie called Spring with the girl, one also needs to close the sacred space. In the case of Spring, she now leads the entities out of the underworld, like these winter spirits, and symbolically she leads those winter spirits out of the unconscious into the light and into the known. You know, which is also a requirement of being able to work with any entity or energy. You can only work with it in such a way. You know, and this creates a transformation in the movie from winter to spring. You know, which is the purpose of a ritual. But also in a symbolic manner in this movie, it is about going from the darkness, from the underworld, to what lies beyond once that darkness has been penetrated. You know, the metaphorical treasure waiting beyond the perils of the fight with the dragon, one could say. So the live energy itself. But this is also itself then symbolic of the process of death and rebirth, which is, you know, what the entire movie really symbolizes. But in a similar manner, the ritual, what you're doing and what you're performing within this in the sacred space, is transformative by nature. So now the ritual of transformation has been performed. It becomes important. Once the ritual of transformation has been performed, then it becomes important to also close the sacred space again and let the energies and the deities return to their initial realm. You know, that's also after the sacred space has been created and the ritual has been performed. like the shaman acknowledges, for instance, the four directions again, or the spirits, or certain deities, and the purpose of this is to perform another ritual of liminality. This time, going from the sacred to the profane. So now that this leads the person that then entered the space back to their world. And then often after that, then they can start to incorporate what they have encountered when they were crossing that border into the sacred, into their everyday life. The reason why I felt like bringing this topic of the sacred space up in the first place, and then is because in our modern world there's not a lot of space set apart for anything like that, nor time. There's no space or time really set apart for it. There are like fleeting moments of such sacred spaces, but it is exactly those spaces that are really important for those transformative rituals. It's also what happens, for instance, when you go to a therapist. You go into such a sacred space, and similarly, it's why, for instance, the Discord server that I have, the Fox Den, has certain rules that I have, for instance, about politics, to leave that behind, because those are certain social things that would disrupt the sacred space, and hence disrupt the process of transformation. And it would be making it extremely difficult to work with not only the people, but also like the energies, and in the Jungian sense the anima, the shadow, and those other archetypes. And I hope with this video then also that it makes you think about like creating those spaces or those times for oneself in whatever shape or form that might take. But that is it for this time about this topic. I might be doing still something more about the shamanic archetype, but I probably would be diving into some other topics first. Okay, so see you next time, my foxlings. Okay, bye bye.